Welcome, guys, back to the Grateful Living podcast. Today, I'm thankful to have Steve Phillip. Steve is a suicide prevention and workplace well-being advocate and the director and founder of the Jordan Legacy, an organization whose mission is to be at the forefront of the advancement of mental health towards preventing suicide. Steve got into this line of work after losing his son Jordan to suicide in December of 2019. Steve, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, no, thank you. No, really appreciate the invitation and good to speak to you today.
Of course, thankful to have you on. So, Steve, if you could, can you give us a little background on your family and what Jordan was like as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, Jordan was one of two children. Danielle, his elder sister, who now works closely with me. We had a pretty stable family unit through Jordan's growing up. We lived in the northwest of England. He had good friends. He was a sensitive child. I think we've often described him. He could be quite sensitive, but also, was an energetic lad, very much into his sports. He was a very keen basketball player, and when he was around about 7 or 8 years old, as a family, we decided to emigrate to Canada, and in fact lived for several years in the frozen waste of Winnipeg. It wasn't always frozen, of course, but it certainly has a reputation and the affectionate nickname of Winterpeg, of course. That helped him really develop his sports, love of sports, and particularly basketball. But we made a decision to come back in 1997 to the UK, a decision that was a really tough one for Jordan. He was getting that 12, 13 years old age, very important age. Developed friendships, developed, his personality. He was a Canadian kid, really when he came back to the UK. Certainly had some struggles there. I think with that for sure, he really didn't want to come back. But he went to school, subsequently went on to university, and was part of a pretty stable family. By his mother and I actually ultimately, our marriage did fall apart, and we separated and ultimately divorced in 2005. And that was a time when Jordan had just gone to university, and in fact we had to kind of share the news with him on his first half-term break, if you like, when he came back from the northeast of England to our home. And that was pretty crucial time in his life, and I think a very difficult time. And if we look at that, Jordan went on to have a number of roles and positions, but he completed his law degree. He went to work in London for a period of time. He never followed the path of law specifically. That was something he ultimately decided, interestingly, wasn't the right pathway for him. But as he moved through a career and, ultimately got on the housing market, bought his own house. And as we get to, his early 30s now, he's securing jobs with the Home Office in the UK, working in immigration here as an officer, and then more recently as an officer with what is known as the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the IOPC here. They essentially investigate as a government body any complaints against the UK police force here. And although his mother and I separated, we maintained a very good relationship. Ultimately, I remarried, and he had a great relationship with his stepmom, a loving sister and family. But in 2015, after some period of recognition, I think on everyone's part, that Jordan was having struggles of some kind, he was finally diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety in the May of 2015. The first time he'd opened up really and talked about those issues. And that was the first time I think, I was certainly aware of this. And that began a kind of journey for him of kind of managing his depression, predominantly through antidepressants from the GP. He did have some initial cognitive behavioral therapy in the early days, about a 14-week period. But Jordan wasn't one for going to counselors and therapists, or maybe the right one hadn't appeared for him. But certainly, I was never aware that following that initial CBT therapy of him actually ever going to see a counsellor or a therapist during the next 4 or 5 years. So yeah, a little bit of background on Jordan, if that's useful.
Yeah. So, you talked about May of 2015. I'm curious, prior to that, was there any discussion in high school or college of him having, mental health struggles or from like a breakup or university pressure or anything like that?
Yeah, no, not specific discussions. Though, when we kind of look back, his mother certainly was aware that, on his first return to the UK and going back to school, even though he was kind of mixing with a number of old friends, albeit from 5 years ago, as quite a young guy. That there was that he might have been on the receiving end of some bullying at school. We don't know the details of that, and that had much to do with the fact that he had this strange accent, Canadian kid. He suddenly had a growth spurt. He had a pretty shaved head, in keeping with the basketball players of the era there. He'd be the guy that certainly out of school uniform would be wearing basketball jerseys and vests and different. So I think he attracted a little bit of attention at that stage, that was uncomfortable for him. He had good friends, so he had a support network. We know he did go through a relationship breakup, one of the first serious relationships for him, prior to him going to university. We know that was a very difficult period for him. So if you think of coming off the back of leaving Canada, which he didn't want to do, the pressures of coming back to the UK, that relationship and subsequent breakdown, leaving to go to university, the breakup of his parents' marriage. I think, although none of this was talked about and there was no evidence of Jordan displaying specific mental health issues, we know he was sensitive. We know he was quiet. But there's certainly no discussions around any specific mental health issues.
Yeah. I guess during that 2015 time period, till 2019, what was, in terms of you and his relationship with talking about that aspect of his life, was he open about dealing with mental health issues, or did he ever use the word suicide in any of the discussion he had with you or his mom?
No, if we look at the dynamics of the relationship, so Jordan during that time was living fairly close to me in the Yorkshire area of the UK. His mother lives on the northwest coast, so we're looking at a distance of probably a couple of hours driving, 80 miles here. His mother, interestingly, had for many years was a senior mental health nurse in the UK. She was probably more attuned to signs and concerns. But you have this very difficult role, don't you, where, are you the mother or are you the professional mental health nurse? From my point of view, I worked as a busy consultant. That was my background, training and leadership and management and other areas of consultancy. So although Jordan and I initially kind of lived together following the separation from his mother, we were kind of busy and we got on with life. We go out for a beer and, we never had those discussions. And even subsequently, after Jordan had left living with me to go and live with a girlfriend, when he got to that point in 2015 where he reached a really, really low point and for the first time admitted and opened up about having issues, I remember picking him up from his girlfriend's house and bringing him back to live with his stepmother and I for a period of time, and seeing this guy, walk out of the house, get in the car, sit next to me with barely a word, rucksack and some clothes, drove home, barely a word. This was someone at his lowest ebb. Now, my knowledge of mental health, I talk about this a lot now. Back in those days, I often say it was a good solid 2 out of 10. I'm probably flattering myself, but I didn't understand. I didn't understand depression. Suicide was never on my radar, or even up until the moment Jordan took his life. I'm not aware that it was on the radar of any family members or friends at all. But that started a journey of Jordan from his lowest ebb, going to the GP, getting the antidepressants, going through the CBT, and spending a period of weeks living with myself and his stepmom, who did a great job kind of talking with Jordan. A lot of times when I'm traveling, around the UK with clients, she did quite an amazing job during that time in just having very open discussions with Jordan. There was a huge amount of trust there. Again, she wasn't a mental health expert at all, but just having that person, maybe slightly detached from mum and dad directly, be able to sit down at the table in the kitchen and just have a chat over a meal, and he was he very much opened up at that stage, and that saw him actually over the coming weeks with the therapy and the support start to rebuild himself and get back out into life and kind of go back to work. And that pattern then really, Anna, through the next 4 years was one of him being reasonably stable in terms of out there working, holding down relationships, coming to the birthday parties, and he was a difficult guy to get together with. The family would often say, even his sister, who also lives on the northwest coast there, and they were very close as siblings. She would often say, it's so hard to get Jordan to come over, or can we come over and see you? I don't know, I'm busy. And you kind of look at that dynamic and say, how much of that was Jordan protecting himself? How much of that was Jordan protecting us from what he was going through? You'd get him round and to a family event, and he was great. He was on good form. He'd go to his friends' weddings, and he was the guy with the dance moves, at the weddings. He was the guy that, people say would light up the room and had this aura about him. Good looking guy, 6 foot plus tall, good looking guy, real caring, nurturing kind of individual. He was really one for rooting for the underdog. He would stand up for you if you were in that position, as if you were his brother, in situations, whoever it was. So that was the pattern, really, that if he then found himself spiraling downwards into depression, he would go back to the GP, and the solution was antidepressants. Now, he was someone who didn't like taking them, so the pattern would then be to wean himself off.
Yeah.
But then again, go low and start the cycle again. And look, I'm certainly, we both discussed before coming on air that neither of us are mental health professionals or psychologists here, but I'm a dad who's learned a lot in the last 31 months. And, one of the things we know about antidepressants is that, it's really difficult to go through a cycle of going on to antidepressants and coming off again, because there will always be that initial period when you go back on antidepressants where they're more likely to take you to a lower place before they start to work effectively. And very, very tragically, in the November of 2019, Jordan was in that position where he went back, had an appointment with the GP, the doctor, who I subsequently spoke with. He was in a distressed state during the conversation, but apparently the doctor had asked him whether he was considering suicide. Jordan said no. End of that conversation. There was a 34-year-old guy sitting in opposite the doctor in tears at times. If that's not a flag, kind of what is. But of course, he got his prescription, and when I spoke to the GP, he said, when I told him what had happened, he was really upset himself, and he said, we have an appointment in 2 days' time to kind of review how things are going. I said, well, clearly that appointment isn't going to take place now. So that's kind of Jordan's dealing with depression, and as a family, kind of where we were. We just didn't really. And just to add to that, Arnav, I think about the weeks leading up to Jordan's death, where he and I went to a concert to watch one of our favourite bands, Hootie and the Blowfish. We were big fans of them, and they came to Leeds. We went to watch them. We were out, at a special whiskey tasting evening gift that I was given by Jordan's mum for my birthday earlier in the summer. And, you know your son's struggling, but you don't have any knowledge of mental health issues or how to have the conversation. So your default position is, I'll be dad. When we go out for a beer, I'll be dad. I'm not going to ruin the evening or bring the evening down. I'll ask him how he's doing. No, that's an easy. And if he says he's okay, I've ticked that box, haven't I? Yeah, I've kind of done my job. Let's just have a good evening and enjoy the concert, and let him know you're there. But where do you take that conversation? Where do you again draw the line between seeing your son who you don't see every week or necessarily every month, and just having another conversation about his mental health? We knew what Jordan's reaction would be often, and that would be, when you started to pressure him and push him, and you'd see that look on his face and go, yeah, don't kind of go there. So we didn't.
Yeah.
I look back at that with a very different viewpoint now. But at the time, I can imagine many families being in that dilemma, if you like, about how do we deal with this while still remaining a parent or a sister or a brother or whatever, and not pushing too many buttons that might, mess up the relationship or whatever. It's a really difficult situation.
Yeah, that's extremely tough because, you don't want him feeling like you're always being in like that doctor role. You want him to be, you're his dad. So that's definitely a very tough line to kind of figure out of where to push and where not to.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
yeah, and I guess I'm pressing a little bit here, but as you've had discussions with, maybe his girlfriend or his sister or his friends, you know, was there any discussion of the word suicide? Was anybody aware that he was dealing with that type of thought at all, or
No, not that I'm aware of. No,
yeah,
there is nobody,
okay,
even his closest friends, at any point. And I've spoken to a lot of them in depth. We've been out together and cried together, and done all kind of things really. And but there is not one of them that has ever said, yeah, Jordan did mention the word suicide. And these were really close friends.
yeah,
These are people that are messaging him every day. And yes, he would talk about his struggles and the depression, but never was there a single moment. Now, what's really interesting about that is that you could deduce from that maybe Jordan hadn't considered suicide until very much toward the end of his life. We know differently. And the reason we know differently is that as part of our journey after his death, to go back to his house and deal with everything that you've got to deal with, possessions, bills, just everything you've got to deal with there. We went up into the loft and the attic in his house, and there were boxes of his belongings. He's recently, in the last couple of years, moved from another house that he owned and bought this one. And we found all kinds of things, from his basketball trophies and birthday cards, family cards, to, for the very first time, we saw his notes from his CBT session in 2015. We were never aware of what the conversations were, clearly, with his therapist, because that's confidential. But there it was for the first time. What we also found were partially completed journals, really notebooks that would continue for a period of months in a certain year and then curtail. So there wasn't like a full year's journal. But we look back at some of the writings in there about his innermost thoughts and what he was going through. And there was one diary journal entry from June of 2015. And this was a time where Jordan was just about to turn 30 years old. And I decided that he and I would go on a dad-son trip. And I booked us a holiday away to the Amalfi Coast in Italy, Jordan, and we just had the most amazing time. Now, Jordan was struggling at that time, of course. It's not long since his diagnosis. He would openly say that he very rarely looked forward to anything. So if say you're looking forward to your friend's wedding this weekend or whatever, no, not really, but I'll go. And his mother had a conversation about the trip that he and I were going on. And she said, "Are you, really exciting? Are you looking forward to it?" And he said, "No, just." He didn't look forward to anything. He openly said that I don't look forward to anything. And yet, in his own words to his mother afterwards, it was the best trip he'd ever been on, and we just had a great time. So put that in context. We're reading a journal entry from June, which is when we went to Italy, written probably just before we went, maybe, or around that time. And there was the line. I remember reading out to the family here in the house when we were all here, just going through some of the things we'd brought back from Jordan's home, and the line there that said, "Been researching methods of suicide again today. Found this particular method might be a bit difficult to get hold of." And you go, wow. 2015, 4.5 years before he ends his own life. That's the first documented evidence we had that he was researching methods of suicide and looking for means. How long prior to that had he been considering it? Yeah. And yet, to come back to your question, as far as I'm aware, no one was aware that that was a consideration.
Yeah. Was he generally, did he struggle to ask for help?
I think I don't know whether he didn't ask for help. I think I think I would look at that and say he didn't ask for help. He was a very private, very proud guy. We know a lot of men, young men that are like that, sadly. So I think there's little doubt in my mind that he didn't ever want to be a burden to other people, and that's something I've heard from many people that have lost loved ones, and the suicide notes I've read from other people. So I think there was an element of not wanting to be a burden to anyone, and just I'll get on with it and I'll deal with it. So I think there was some of that involved as well, really.
Yeah. Is there, obviously there may be parents that listen to this who, have a child that deals with mental health issues, and they're kind of listening to these, maybe in the same boat as you. They don't know what mental health or depression and things it wasn't something that they grew up on. It's something that's recently gotten a lot more education and traction. For that parent where they're, maybe now their child has become, clinically diagnosed with something. Do you have any piece of advice for them as you look at your own journey?
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a lot of these conversations, and just had a very similar conversation just a few days ago with somebody I know who's concerned about her 19-year-old son, and not being clinically diagnosed, but we know he has anxiety and struggles. So I have many of these conversations, and have done over the last 31 months with concerned parents. And I think what I'm able to do through a level of knowledge I've built, I deliver many talks to organizations and companies. I'm not a mental health professional. I have my mental health first aid certification here, and I've made sure that any of the advice, inverted commas, or guidelines that I provide through my talks are well researched and in line with the appropriate resources that are there. So a lot of my talks are around how to spot the signs, and how to have and open up that conversation and signpost someone who's struggling. So I use the same approach, really, talking with parents. I think, firstly, I think you've got to be brave enough to be direct enough with your kids. And what that means is, very simple kind of 3-step process. I use this in my talks, AID for aid. The first thing is to talk about the activity that you're aware of that is concerning you, and that could be changes in patterns of behavior. Could be the person's tearful a lot of the time. Maybe they're drinking excessively, locking themselves away in their room. But there's a change. what is the activity you've noticed? Be really direct with that, and just say, Steve, look, I want to have a chat with you because I have specifically, observed this activity and behavior. Because that's hard to argue with. If you say, look, I want to have a chat with you because I'm worried about you, what does that mean? And the response is likely to be, well, I'm okay. I'm fine. But if you're really very specific, I've experienced this activity, this behavior. Okay. Impact. What is the impact of that? Look, I've noticed the impact it's having on you. You've been a lot more tearful. You've been, certainly a lot more, you're reacting very differently to small things. And here's an example. So again, it's about being very specific. I noticed the impact it's having on your brother, your sister, your mates, whatever it is. What is the impact? So if you mentioned the activity, you mentioned the impact. And the third part of aid is the desired outcome. And that's working together towards a next step or a solution or whatever the outcome is. And you can only do that collaboratively. And that is saying, okay, so this is what I've observed. This is what I think is happening to you and those around you. Tell me what's going on for you. Just to explain to me how is this impacting on you as well. Help me to kind of understand what's going on. And okay, so what do we do about this? What would you like to do about this? How can I help and support you? And those kind of simple frameworks, it's like a toolkit, isn't it? I think if every parent had that really simple toolkit of AID or something similar to that, rather than any complex kind of approach and journey, and some of them I think get a little too complicated, but being brave enough to sit down and have that conversation, I think that's a really important step. And you've got to kind of prepare for that. You don't suddenly spring it necessarily on the individual, but you do say, look, I want to have a chat with you about something. Have you got a few minutes? Make sure you're in an environment where you're not going to get interrupted or something like that. But that's the kind of advice that I would give. And almost, I'm going to say something that almost, if you're not overly concerned, I think it's a really important conversation to have with your kids about how you're doing generally. You might not be worried about suicide or that they have depression or anxiety, but just generally sometimes just sitting down with our kids and having that kind of conversation just about things you've observed. Of course, the important thing there, Arno, is you need to make the time to observe what's going on and not be too busy with your career or whatever else is going on.
Yeah. I guess as you've talked to, Jordan's friends, Charlotte, Danielle, is there anything, I don't know if this is a fair question, but obviously, is there anything within that last week before December 4th, where you guys look back and were like, this was a sign or anything of that nature, as you look back on that week before?
I think there are some. I can't speak on behalf of the others, but I've had WhatsApp messages shared with me, from good friends, and this was some of the things that were worrying Jordan. He had a particular confrontation at work with a line manager that concerned him. So there were clearly pressures. But if I give you one example, so of signs that, with the knowledge I have now, are signs, but at the time weren't. So a few days possibly now, I can look back at the WhatsApp message exchange I had with Jordan, but we were having a bit of chat. Obviously, we were concerned in those final weeks. He was in a much lower position than we'd seen him for some time. But I had a WhatsApp general conversation with Jordan. And at the end of the conversation, Jordan messaged and he just said, okay, Dad, but look, at least I managed to get up this morning, have a shave and have a shower. To be honest, that didn't look like it was going to be on the cards, for today. And I remember me just saying something glibly like, well, that's good, Jordan. At least you're getting up and having a wash. And it was almost quite light-hearted Well, that's a positive, isn't it? You know what? Now, with the knowledge that I now have, I'd frame that really differently. I'd be saying, Jordan, are you telling me you haven't got up and had a wash and a shave for the last few days then? And even today looked unlikely. Yeah. Tell you what, I'm coming over. Let's have a coffee. Let's have a talk and see how you're really doing. You know, it's easy to look back with hindsight, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think it's also, if you have the knowledge, which is part of what I do through the Jordan Legacy and all the work we do to try and educate and give people the tools to spot the signs. It's just part of the work we do. You know, that if you are aware of what it is you should be looking out for, then you're able to take some form of preventative action. If you're completely unaware of what you should be looking out for, then you're going to do what I did and say, that's good.
Yeah.
But it clearly wasn't good, you know.
Yeah. You know, we don't need to extensively talk about December 4th, but do you want to just speak about, you know, maybe some aspects of your experience and, you know, obviously there are people, unfortunately, parents receiving that call today. So as you look back, you know, are there any pieces of advice?
Gosh, no advice really about, you know, the moment that it happens. You know, I think, gosh, you know, we could talk for 3 hours on that day
Yeah.
alone. You know, I'm there working, you know, 140 miles away in my consultancy role with a company. I get into the car and immediately on the dashboard is an incoming call from Charlotte, Jordan's girlfriend, who's come home to find the most unimaginable experience of her life, and of course ours. So you imagine kind of what goes through your mind at that moment, and so of course we dealt with all that. We then, you know, you deal with all that happens on that journey home, and the conversations that you're having with family members, and the sharing that news with his mum and his sister and his grandmother, and you know, so you can imagine what that is like. You know, and then the family all gathering at our home that evening, including Charlotte. I mean, Jordan's house is kind of 25 minutes drive from me here. So, of course, she was brought over to our house, and rather than go back to South Yorkshire where she lived. So, you know, so you can imagine it. You know, so someone once described, you know, this experience of suicide happening as like, it's like a hand grenade going off in your front living room. You know, it is literally that is what it's like. And I heard someone once describe the grief to suicide, because any loss is hard, you know, whether you lose a child or a loved one of any kind. Grief is hard, but someone said grief to suicide, though, is like grief with the volume turned up. And I thought, yeah, I can relate to that terminology as well. There's no advice I can give in the immediate aftermath of that. The only advice I can give is what happens afterwards. And I suppose that leads to, you know, the Jordan Legacy, you know, the work that we do in a charitable sense to help prevent suicide. You know, if you think of what happened in the immediate weeks following Jordan's death, as we're trying to deal with the chaos and issues with the police. You know, I could tell you stories of driving around for 2 days around this area of Yorkshire, trying to find out where they'd taken Jordan, trying to find the police that were even involved in dealing with his case. You know, we received I got a mobile number from a female police officer who was on the scene looking after Jordan, who left her mobile number, who then goes on annual leave and holiday for 8 days and doesn't answer a phone. So you're thinking, well, who am I dealing with the police? Where is Jordan? Where have they taken his body? You know, so I'm driving around police stations. You know, so you think in this day and age, 21st century, yeah. So, you know, why I'm sharing all this is that 3 weeks after Jordan's death, I'm a big user of LinkedIn. It was, in fact, my career for 11 and a half years leading up to that moment was I ran my own consultancy practice working with corporate organizations and other businesses, teaching them how to use social media from a business perspective. That's what I did. I kind of knew LinkedIn inside out, and Twitter and all the channels there. That's exactly what I was doing on that day. I got the call with a large automotive group. So I decided to write an article, a blog, and post it on LinkedIn. It's there today for everyone to see, and it's called "The Day My Son Took His Own Life," and it was to explain what had happened, but the aftermath and the chaos. And my view was, do other people go through this? Are they driving around trying to find their child's body? Just have they got police standing on a doorstep with Charlotte watching them sitting in a police van while two of them are laughing and joking on the doorstep, maybe talking about the football that weekend? I don't know. But is that what happens when someone dies by suicide? So I wrote this article, and the main purpose of that article was, if I want people to realize the devastation that's left behind. And in doing that, hopefully someone who's considering taking their own life would read it and go, I can't do that. Well, I can tell you that's the effect it had, because when I published it, I hesitated before I pushed the publish button. The article went viral. I had outpourings from psychologists to people that had lost loved ones to suicide, to people that were considering suicide, all kinds of people. I had messages and emails coming into my inbox from people like Ariana Huffington from the Huff Post, the next day. It was off the scale. And it was that response, including people saying, can you help me? 3 weeks after losing my son with no knowledge of mental health. But seriously, can you help me? Where I had to go to the family.
Yeah.
Jordan's mum, a senior mental health nurse, and say, how do I, what do I say? How do I respond? And we ended up with a very simple kind of message of where to signpost people to, the Samaritans in the UK. I didn't even know what you were supposed to do.
Yeah.
So I had to kind of put that in place. But that did lead me to think, look, I know I had a voice on LinkedIn. I was probably, in some respects, one of the top trainers and coaches and speakers on LinkedIn in the UK. I knew I had a voice. Would I now have the same, a different voice on the same platform? Could I use that voice in any way to make any kind of difference? And those seeds literally became the foundation for the Jordan legacy and the work we do now.
Yeah. Obviously as parents, you feel a certain responsibility for your kid. Even when they become adults. How was your process with guilt or regret? And do you have any advice for parents in similar position who are feeling guilty?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you do, without question. I've got a good friend of mine, Mike McCarthy, who, we work closely together on a pretty big initiative we're working on here in the UK at the moment called the Baton of Hope. And we appeared, both of us, on BBC Breakfast News just 10 days ago. And Mike said, it's a parent's responsibility to look after the kids and look out for the kids. This is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to protect our kids, and then suddenly we're thrust into this position where we haven't been able to. So I think you do feel all kinds of emotions. You're bound to from initial anger, maybe. Why have you done this? That disappeared very quickly for me. To the confusion, but the guilt is part of it. What more could I have done? But I think it's really important how I frame my feelings around this issue and how I've managed to kind of deal with them, compartmentalize them maybe in some ways. So what I will say is that even to this day, I feel I won't use the word guilt, but there are things I could have done differently through Jordan's life. Okay. I think we can all look at from parenthood and say the things we could have done differently. There are definitely things I look back at in terms of how busy I was through my life, how much time I really spent understanding what Jordan was going through. And will put my hands up and say there were things I could have done a lot better. Does that mean I feel guilty? And I'm going to say no. But what I'm going to say is I could have been much better prepared. I could have had a much better toolkit of knowledge. I could have made the time. And so there are regrets. I think there are regrets that I focused so much on what I was trying to achieve in life. Yes, I was there. Yes, I've heard from friends of Jordan's who would say that I was the best dad, that he looked up to me in all kinds of ways. And in his suicide note to us, he said you were the best parents family I could have had. So I've heard, anecdotal conversations, but that's not enough for me. I do know there were things I could have done differently and better as a parent to be there for my son. I can't carry the guilt because that's not healthy. But I can now go out to parents and others and say, look, equip yourself with the knowledge. Understand about mental health, because 1 in 4 people in the UK experience mental health illnesses of one kind or another. We are losing 17 people every week to suicide in this country. 200 pre-high school kids every year in this country take their own lives. If you think this won't come knocking on your door, then you've got to change your mindset. You've got to be prepared. Look, you would think nothing of taking your child to the dentist or the dental hygienist to look after their teeth. It's part of what we do. Take your teeth, otherwise they'll fall out.
Yeah.
What are you doing about your kids' mental health? What are you doing? What are your plans to equip your knowledge and kind of look out for them in that respect from an early age? So I think I'd say to all parents, take an interest in mental health, equip yourself with the basic knowledge and understanding of what the risks might be. Don't worry yourself and lose sleep overnight suddenly, but because of this. But be prepared, as we said earlier, to every so often sit down with your children and ask them the questions about what's going on, for you. How are you doing, really? And look, we're using this a lot over here. I don't know about, over your side of the world, but, we've got into a kind of a mantra here where it's not enough just to ask someone, how are you doing? Because everyone's going to put a smile on their face and say, I'm fine. And if they do, you go back to them and say, okay, but look, how are you really doing? We've got to ask it twice. And that second question's got to be framed a little differently. And if we start to do that more often, because I think most of us ask how are you doing as an extension of hello, we don't really want the answer. We're just being polite. Well, we've got to stop being polite, and we've got to start genuinely taking an interest in our kids' mental health and the mental health of our loved ones and friends and colleagues.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Again, Steve, for you, and for parents out there in similar positions, right? Sleeping might be tough and things of that nature. I'm curious if you, what have you done for have you joined a support group? Have you started seeing a mental health professional? What have you done for yourself or that has kind of helped with the grieving process?
It's interesting. I know what I've done for myself, and I'll come back to that in just a second. Sleep is critical, and I will go back to some of the signs with Jordan. He was struggling to sleep. Some real clear signs there. In the early stages following Jordan's death, we all as a family struggled with sleep. We all ended up with the same sleeping medication of choice amongst the family, and that was important because clearly, I suffered with physical trauma for some months afterwards, and that would manifest itself in violent head twitches, and also just body reactions. I would call them convulsions. I knew it wasn't the right word every time I use it. I've never found a word to explain it, but you can imagine me standing at the kitchen sink doing the dishes, and someone has punched you in the midriff and knock you back 2 feet. That's what it would happen to me in bed. It would happen anywhere at all. And I did, at the behest of the family, because I was kind of looking after everyone else and looking after the effects. But and I went for some counselling, and I consider myself to be quite a self-aware individual, quite a resilient type of guy in many respects. So I went along for the counselling, had the initial session. It was interesting. I went back for the second one, and it was kind of, how are you doing? I said, well, I'm doing fine, and yeah, I'm dealing with Jordan's affairs, and I've written this article, and I'm doing this, and I'm getting up, and yeah, I'm kind of sleeping okay now, still using sleeping medication occasionally. And she said, well, you seem to be doing remarkably well. And funnily enough, the doctor I saw said the same thing when I got the sleeping medication. And I just looked at her, I said, you know what, I am. I'm kind of getting on. And to be honest, I don't know why I'm coming here. I literally said, I look, you're a really nice person, and these are really great chats. But I don't know why I'm here at the moment, because I'm kind of functioning. And I said, well, that's fine, and if you ever want to come back, you can do. And kind of half an hour into the second session, we kind of said farewell, shook hands, and off I went. But here's how I'm managing it. I believe that almost immediately after Jordan's death, I had a purpose. The purpose was to try and make some sense out of what had happened. The purpose was also, I knew there were practical, logistical things had to be dealt with, and I'm a very practical, logistical type of person. So from organising funerals to dealing with coroners' offices, the police, all kinds of things, I had that sense of purpose, trying to keep the family support, do whatever I could do there. And then almost immediately that I'd written that article that I published that I referred to before, I suddenly had this responsibility to respond and to people that were reaching out to me. That led me in turn to the Jordan legacy, and what could I start to do, if anything, to learn more about mental health, to learn more about suicide, and then in some ways link up with people in an already reasonably large network that I had, to try and make a difference. So I think the advice to everyone who's going through this, we're talking maybe parents specifically here, but friends, the ripple effect of suicide on average will impact indirectly or directly another 135 people. That's the stat. What can you do? You can sit on a sofa with a bottle and drink yourself into oblivion. And that was an option. And a friend of mine said this, once. He said, this is the choice that you have. Or you can get out there and you can do something. And the advice is, find some sense of purpose out of this mess. Whatever that is, get yourself up, get out there. And it might not be starting a charity or doing whatever it is. It might be just a sense of purpose is, I'm just going to run myself like a lunatic for 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers till I collapse in a heap somewhere. And I'm going to do that every day. It could be, but find some kind of purpose that gets you up, gets you moving, gives you something to aim for, whatever that might be. And that might not be reading books on suicide, by the way, and things that I did. That might not be the right journey to go on. But I think whatever it is for you, find a sense of purpose. And in doing that, that allows you to get up each day, get dressed, get washed, get out there and live a life step by step. Look, you endure a loss to suicide. You never get over it. But that process of enduring does become easier step by step. I know that, I'm out delivering a talk in front of 50, 60 people last night, an event I was invited to, telling my story, just 10 minutes. And there were 2 moments during that talk where my voice broke and I kind of clung on, even now, to the talk. But so it never goes away. It never goes away. But that sense of purpose kind of carries you through. And last night, that sense of purpose was, I had a message to deliver to 50 or 60 people in a room. And that's my job tonight, really.
Yeah. Obviously family dynamics are going to change. Um, you know, is there a way or any advice that you have on, um, celebrating Jordan's birthday or celebrating, whatever you guys celebrated as a family, whether it's Christmas, New Year's, or whatever, in terms of handling that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned. I mean, it's really appropriate because next Monday is Jordan's birthday, the 11th of July. So that was a perfect lead in there, Arnav. Really, yeah, and I can tell you how we'll spend that day because coincidentally, it also happens to be my youngest grandson's birthday. His first name is Samuel. That's Jordan's middle name, deliberately chosen. So I'll be going over to spend time with Jordan's sister. Obviously, it's her youngest, and the family over there. Our ritual will be that because Jordan's ashes are in a grave over in the northwest, there where he was brought up originally, and where his sister is and his mum. We spend the morning at the graveside. We'll be there. It'll be sad, but it's got easier. We'll play some music. We'll play some of Jordan's favourite tunes, and we'll lay some things on the grave and be there for Jordan's birthday and leave a card and everything that we do. And then in the afternoon, we'll have a very lively 6-year-old that will keep us entertained for his birthday. And look, kids are a real leveler, aren't they? Because the first time that happened in 2020, the first birthday, I remember it was a summer's day, but it was wet, it was miserable, it was pretty grey. And we were all standing around very quietly around the graveside in the morning, and young Samuel is there with his older brother. And we sat there, we were standing there were tears, and we were very quiet afterwards, bit of music playing. And then Samuel looked up at his mum, Danielle, Jordan's sister, and just looked up. He said, "I'm bored." He said, "Can we go home and have my party now?" And we just started laughing.
Yeah.
And I think from that moment on, that it's that moment, isn't it, where you suddenly go, there are still things to celebrate in life, and still things that we can have hope for. And I think that moment was a real light bulb moment for us. So yeah, Christmases are tough. Father's Day just here in the UK, it's I've got a daughter sending me a wonderful card of Jordan with a photograph of Jordan and Danielle and I on it. That's hard and it's lovely at the same time. I have a memory box of things from Jordan here and all the cards. And my ritual is that I will take out a different card each time for my birthday, and which happens to be tomorrow. Actually, I've forgotten that. That's tomorrow. Wow. But a card will come out of the box from Jordan. It will go on the mantelpiece in the lounge. And, he, God. He won't send me one anymore, but that's my way of dealing with it. So we will still have these happy moments and tinged with sadness, but that's the journey kind of going forward now. Really, that's what life is. But you've got to find those moments of hope and still celebrate the life. And I think we're able to do that more now. I don't think we're doing it enough yet. We had a huge life celebration event last August. Wonderful friend and lady who put on a great event in her huge garden she has, and we had a band from another great friend of mine who's a great musician, and brought lots of people together, and that was deliberately to celebrate Jordan's life. So I think my advice is that look, whatever the event is, you're going to have a moment of sadness and reflection. Okay, you can't ignore it, but make sure that event also has some upbeat moments of hope, that you're going to celebrate something there as well, and make sure that is the second half of the event and the day. I think that's really, really important that you do that. Look, Jordan had 34 years. Look, he was a good-looking, lovely guy who achieved way more than he knew he or believed he achieved. And I think it would be unfair on him and all of us not to celebrate that relationship and that life that he had, and to continually only focus on suicide and that loss. That makes it sound like that's very easy to do. It's not, and I think we as a family probably have to get better at that, because we are still reflecting 31 months on the event and the loss, and not enough on the life that was lived. And maybe that is the next part of the journey for us.
No, I think that makes sense, because I think at its whole, I can't speak for Jordan, but he doesn't want you guys to be suffering. That's not, he wants you guys to be happy. And, you know, a lot of it is, you know, again, can't speak for him, but maybe escaping the pain for him, um, more than not wanting to live. And, I think that, some of the things that you said this today, when he was with people, he was joyful. You guys kept him alive, and things of that nature. One other question I had, Steve, is friends of yours, right, might be listening to this, and um, when they get a beer with you, it's kind of like what we talked about before: is how much should we push? How much should we ask about that aspect of your life, and how much should we just say, "How are you doing? What's going on this week?"
Yeah, look, yeah, I was fortunate that we have some fantastic friends. I have some great friends, and we've openly talked and cried about stuff, and I know this isn't true of everyone who's lost someone to suicide, but one of the things I think I've been really blessed with, and it could be because we were so open very early on about what happened with Jordan, is that I've never experienced the stigma that a lot of people have said they experienced, where friends have crossed the road or not got in touch. I know Danielle. We've got an internet radio show called Jordan's Place. We've literally recorded the first episode. It airs at 7 p.m. tonight in the UK.
Nice.
On Yawa Radio. There's a plug for everyone. It's a fortnightly show, and Danielle talks about this because we asked the question, and she said, lots of people were really good in reaching out. She said, but there was a thing that did surprise her, that one or two friends that she thought she might have heard from didn't get in touch. And maybe that was because it was difficult. So I've not experienced anything like that firsthand, quite the opposite. But maybe there are one or two people that I have, not heard from, but it hasn't registered with me, that just felt they weren't able to. But in the main, people I think have been able to feel very comfortable talking with me about it, because I've been so open, and we have been as a family about what happened. We've almost given people permission to kind of talk. How am I doing? Incredibly busy week. The Jordan legacy work carries on, and we work very strategically with government and with communities and businesses around practical solutions to suicide. Several weeks ago, at the beginning of this year, we announced that we would be collaborating with some other amazing people on an initiative that has its focus for 2 weeks during the summer of 2023, which is called Baton of Hope, where a physical baton will be passing through all 4 nations of the UK, and we'll be getting all cities and towns and communities around the 4 nations to put on their own Baton of Hope activities and events. And it has a very simple mission. It is at a massive scale, to open up the conversation about suicide, to help raise awareness, and to look at what practical solutions need to be put in place. That's my life at the moment. It's all consuming. It's absolutely huge. As I say, it's my birthday tomorrow, but it'll be a regular working day. We'll go for a meal in the evening, apparently, I've been told. But I'll be at my desk tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it'll be pretty relentless through the day till I finish. So but look, I sleep okay. I get up, I can watch TV and have a laugh at a program. I can have a laugh and a joke with friends and family, and then, as you've experienced today, there will be moments, and they come out of nowhere sometimes, where it all just comes washing over you. But look, that's the territory. That is it. It's about being a human being and all that kind of comes with that, I think, really.
Yeah. As I look at time, I just want to ask two more questions. The first one is, just as we wrap up, is there any lesson or thought or something that you kind of want to share on mental health, suicide, anything of that nature?
Yeah, I think it's an important message we're sharing through the baton of hope. We've chosen hope continually as a word. Is that, look, most of the conversations, most of the research, most of the people we've spoken to that have attempted suicide, we know that for many who've attempted and survived, they've gone on to live, very fulfilling lives and have used the word hope themselves. So here's one thing we know about suicide, even in the darkest moments, that suicide is a permanent solution to what is without question a temporary situation. It might not feel like that, but if we can hold on to that and say there is hope somewhere, no matter how desperate you feel, but if you take this step, that's it. There is no coming back from that. Okay, so let's kind of understand that. What we also know is, again, from the evidence and the research, is that most suicides, even up to the moment the act is about to happen, are preventable. Okay, not all of them. We know we will never prevent all suicide, even though we use the term of moving toward a zero suicide community. We'll always move toward it, but it's a heck of a lot better than a government that might say we want to reduce suicide by 10% this year. So what are we doing about the other 90% then? So if we can go forward with hope to say, look, with better education, with better systems, with better processes in place, better preventative solutions, most of the suicides we're seeing now are preventable. That doesn't help us as far as Jordan's loss or anybody else, or Pat or someone like that. But if we can go forward with that hope, then I think we can make a difference. The final point, just to add really, is to say, don't just look to your government. Don't just look to your health services to be the solution. This is something that we can all participate in and make a difference. We all have a responsibility for the mental health and welfare of those around us. And we need to take some responsibility for that too.
Yeah. Steve, the last question I want to ask is, kind of in that vein of celebrating Jordan's life. If you could share with us, a story or a great memory, so we can all kind of take his spirit and, something that represents his spirit and kind of add that to our life for those of us that didn't have the pleasure of meeting him.
Okay, well, I think probably pretty well everybody listening to your show here, Arnav, will be familiar with Batman. I remember in one of the readings we had two funerals for Jordan. One of the readings we had over in the Northwest, there where he was brought up, one of his very close friends got up and told us stories about Jordan, and they shared this particular story of all the lads being out on having a few beers in Leeds locally where they lived, and they were all dressed as superheroes, and several of them as Batman with the Batman mask on. Well, Jordan, he would always commit to anything really in life, and he committed to the character. And throughout that afternoon, the only response he would give to any comment or question was, "I'm Batman." So he gets on the bus apparently, and his mate says, "Yeah, however much we want to go to here." And the guy on the bus there looked at Jordan and said, "Yeah, where to, mate?" And he just said, "I'm Batman."
Yeah.
That was it. So that gives you a little bit of an indication of Jordan's spirit, I think, and his mates just fell about, but there's Jordan for you. He was really Batman all along. There you go.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I just want to thank you for coming on. For anyone that wants to support your work or what you're doing with the Jordan Legacy, what's the best way to help out?
Yeah, straight to the website, Anna. Thank you for that. And it is thejordanlegacy.com.
Sounds good. Well, Steve, Thank you for what you do. I know it can't be easy, um, but it's powerful work, and um, you're helping a lot of lives. Um, with what you're doing and talking about it and destigmatizing it and providing your knowledge. So um, thank you for what you're doing, and yeah, thank you.
Likewise, Arnav, and thank you for the invitation. Really appreciate the opportunity.